Welcome to our discussion today. We're talking about people, the most important part of your organization. I'm Jason Miller, your host. My guests today are Deborah Kircher, the Chief Human Capital Officer for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Angela Bailey, the Chief Human Capital Officer for the Department of Homeland Security, and Jill Goldstein, the Managing Director for Global Talent and HR Business Process Outsourcing for Accenture. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Before we get started, let me set a little context for our discussion today. The federal civilian government has 2.1 million employees. The government is the nation's largest employer of doctors. It employs people with jobs ranging from those who protect the nation's natural resources to those who help educate and oversee historical landmarks, to citizens who provide grants for research, housing, education, and we know a whole lot more. The White House expects the number of federal employees to grow by about 1.5% in 2017. That's about 30,000 new employees. The Department of Veterans Affairs and the Homeland Security Department expect to see the largest increases. VA is expected to hire about 17,000 employees by 2017. DHS is expected to grow by about 4,000 new employees over the next 2 years. In fact, nearly every agency is expected to see some increase in their workforce by 2017. So how do agencies compete for talent, especially when departments are hiring people with hard-to-find skill sets? They're hiring people who are well-educated, and they have plenty of opportunities in a tightening job market. In fact, the White House says 56% of federal workers are employed in the 9 highest-paying private sector occupation groups, such as judges, lawyers, engineers, and scientists. That's compared to 36% in the private sector. Another challenge is the age of the federal workforce. The White House says federal employees are getting older. Currently, the average is 45.4 years old. That's up 2.6 years old over 2 decades ago, and 3 years older than the average worker in the private sector. And of course, we've all heard about the constant drip of the longtime employees retiring from federal service. Between 2009 and 2013, the number of federal retirements have been rising from 87,000 to over 116,000. By 2014, that number had leveled off to 99,000. 2015, again, the same, just under 100,000 federal employees called it a career, representing approximately 3.6% of the total workforce. That includes, of course, postal, judiciary, and congressional workers. In the meantime, the number of employees 30 years or under make up only 7% of the federal workforce. That's compared to 23% in the private sector. So as you can see, the HR replacement, or as one Admiral Rogers from NSA told me recently, the recapitalization of people, which is an odd word to say, but it's his word, not mine, is getting tougher, and it's not keeping up, and there's plenty of reasons why. The hiring process is tough. The perception that the government is just not a good place to work is a hard perception to overcome. And overall, the lack of qualified people in those specific requirement skill set areas, such as cybersecurity, is a challenge for everyone in the workforce. But there's help coming. The Office of Personnel Management recently lifted a 5-year freeze on spending for recruitment, relocation, and retention bonuses. And OPM says they're going to work directly with hiring managers and human resources staff to identify skill gaps, find, recruit the right professionals to fill them. And the White House is also putting a heavy focus on using data to make better decisions for current and future needs. So that leads us to our panel today. What should agencies do to improve those skill sets and ensure the makeup of their workforces meets their needs? What about decisions and data to use them to help recruit? Where do they spend money on marketing, on outreach? And that's what our panelists will talk about today. Once again, our panelists are Deborah Kircher, the Chief Human Capital Officer in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Angela Bailey, the Chief Human Capital Officer for the Homeland Security Department, and Jill Goldstein, the Managing Director of Global Talent and HR Business Process Outsourcing for Accenture. I'm going to start with Angela, kind of the middle person here, because you bring not only the DHS perspective, which is you're new to, but also the OPM for many, many, many years. So recruitment strategy from a government-wide, from an agency level, how is recruitment going? Is it getting easier? Is it getting harder? Just give me a sense.
I think one of the things that that we're doing incredibly well is that we're really starting to wrap our arms around the data, the use of the data. We're getting really smart about that. We know how to go in and mine the different data sets that we have. So we're getting really good at what we'll call workforce planning, where we actually know what our requirements are, where we have our actual gaps are, and then we can get far more targeted as to what it is that we really need to do. And so that, coupled with things like, reducing the burden on the 3 R's and things, makes it so much easier then for us to go in and know how exactly we want to actually start using some of these incentives. So rather than these broad brush approaches, you can, specifically focus in on a specific area, whether it's geographic or it's an occupation or a grade level, and then you can, just more tactically use those kinds of incentives.
Deborah, let me turn to you for a second, because ODNI has had the ability to bring in some of the younger workers. You guys, when you recruited really post the September 11th attacks and the Intelligence Reform Act, you guys brought in a whole series of young people, but then also you had some of the longtime feds as well. So you've achieved that balance in many ways.
We do. So we're always looking at how to strike that better balance. Obviously, after 9/11, we had a very big hiring surge across the intelligence community, which comprises actually 17 different IC elements, departments, and agencies. So as a result of that, we did bring in a very new workforce. I'm happy to report that the retention rate is very high and pretty stable. But then we also have to look at the senior workforce, obviously, because the good news is our attrition rate is very low. But then as a result too, with that low attrition rate, we have to think about that mobility, upward mobility for the younger workforce. So that's why, as an intelligence community, each of the IC elements have to constantly look at their workforce planning initiatives. They have to look at where the occupational gaps, look at those attrition rates, look at the people that are eligible to hire, and then make those determinations for moving forward from the future.
One of the things that Admiral Rogers said at NSA, which is I know very similar to he's part of the intelligence agencies, of course, but is that his retention rate was something like 97%, which says if you look at that numbers, it would take 30 years for us to recapitalize our workforce. Are you able to talk a little bit about what is your retention rate in the high 80s, high 90s, and how do you deal with the fact that to recapitalize your workforce could take 20, 30 years as well?
Right. So every IC element, all 17, all have different attrition rates and different rates of retention. But overall, I say in general, they're all very high. So that is an issue because we have to retain that workforce and we have to keep them motivated and we have to keep them happy, obviously. And the new workforce, their requirements are a little bit different, say, than the more senior workforce.
just a little. They want to look at their cell phones during the day.
They do. But they adjust with that. I mean, they know, obviously, coming into the intelligence community, they can't bring their iPhone, they can't bring their iPad necessarily, but those are part of the trade-offs, too. But the good news is a lot of what they come in for is for the mission related. And that's why I think we have a very high retention rate. What we try to do too is we try to give them workforce flexibilities as best as we can, give them continuous learning opportunities to go out and learn new skills as well. So that listening to the millennials and to the new workforce, that's a lot of what they're looking for when they come to work for the community.
Let me turn to Jill from Accenture. One of the things about what you're hearing from both Angela and Deborah regarding high retention rates, better data, what are you seeing when you work with clients, whether in the federal sector, state and local, or commercial world, when it comes to recruitment and retention?
Yeah, I mean, we are actually seeing a lot of the same things, right? There's a non-negotiable focus on workforce planning, really anticipating what your future needs are, and then working to figure out what talent you need to bring in from the outside, and where you can take advantage of those really strong retention rates to build in some new skills as a part of your workforce. In general, what we found, though, is that there are some areas where the talent supply is just less than the overall talent demand. And the fight for that talent really becomes very aggressive. And so the focus on the general workforce, understanding your value proposition and why it's a good thing to come work for your agency really becomes very important. So not only knowing about the opportunities that are available, but making sure that yours is the agency that people want to go work for really does become important. With the unemployment rates dropping, both the private and public sector is going after the same pool of talent.
Jill, two things I want to kind of talk a little more details about. Number one, when you talk about the talent supply versus demand, we've heard, for instance, cybersecurity is an obvious one. In VA, there's one example, doctors and nurses is an obvious one. Are there other ones that are maybe less obvious that maybe people don't realize that those types of skill sets are in short demand?
Well, I think in addition to more generally technology, right, and then clinical, we're also seeing the data scientists, the people who actually work with the data to produce the analytics and drive the insights is another shortfall of talent in the marketplace.
Do you, Angela or Deborah, do you guys also see similar, when you look at talent shortages and gaps, is it what Jill's saying true for federal agencies too, or is there other ones that maybe maybe Jill sees it from the commercial world and the private sector, and are you guys seeing it differently? Angela?
No, I think that we're actually seeing it the same because, I mean, when you think about it, even though we're probably, well, we are like the country's largest employer, we're still a microcosm of society, right? We're still a microcosm of what's really being hired within the private sector. And so, one of the things that I've been doing a lot of thinking about is I think with our recruiting strategies and stuff, we tend to think that we recruit folks whenever they actually hit college or they're a senior, and then, boy, we're gung-ho and we're going after them. And I was just mentioning this to someone the other day. We don't have kindergartners that are sitting around going, I can't wait to grow up and be a privacy officer, right? Or I can't wait to grow up and be a program analyst. And so I think really, but if you ask those same kindergartners, they will say that they want to be doctors, that they want to be nurses, that they want to be police officers. So I think from a federal government standpoint, one of the things that we need to do is this whole value proposition and where you want to go, we really need to get into, honestly, the elementary schools, probably about 6th grade, and that's where we really need to start our strategies. We really need to help them understand what the career paths are, because if we wait till they're seniors in college, I think that we've just really kind of have missed the whole boat. And so that, filling this talent gap is not going to happen overnight if we're not working with the academic institutions to actually grow and or develop that talent within that framework.
In fact, that goes back to something that Jill said as well regarding this idea of value proposition. Deborah, you guys have the best value proposition in many ways. I'm sure maybe Angela would argue with you. But, you guys do some of the coolest work. You have some of the coolest toys. I've heard only.
Yeah.
And you guys, as you said, the retention rate, people love the mission. So how do you explain the value proposition maybe is easier, but still part of the overall recruitment challenge?
Sure, right. So we're very fortunate. We have a very good mission, and when people on board, they embrace that mission and they're part of the team. So that's the good news. Where we have challenges, obviously, is because you join the intelligence community, you require security clearance. Security clearances obviously can take many, many months, especially with young people. Some of them get very discouraged and they don't want to wait. They get impatient and they might go get another job. So that's probably our biggest challenge. The good news is, though, too, that we do bring them on and we do retain them. Other areas that we're looking at, other than the data scientists, we're looking at those too. We're all competing for cybersecurity in federal government and in private industry. We're also looking at STEM. That's another big area. And for us, foreign language. But we're looking for people too, really with degrees from business management to graphics. But the other area too that we recognize that you have to do that outreach sometimes at an earlier stage, because we'll meet with people now that are on board saying, I was in high school and I didn't even know the intelligence community existed. So what we're doing now, we're finding a lot of our IC agencies are reaching out to some of the high school level, maybe even grammar school when we get to foreign language. For example, for the Star Talk program, that goes down to elementary school. Anything to get that exposure about opportunities in the federal government at an earlier age, we see a big payoff.
And I think sometimes what happens is no one says, I don't want to work for the government, but I want to be a spy.
Right.
I think that's, I know not everyone in the intelligence
Everybody
world is a
wants
spy,
to, right.
but that's very similar to doctors, nurses, firemen,
Right.
police chief. I want to be a spy. And spy can just be that big encompassing thing. So I think that's helpful. And I know, for instance, when there's a movie or a TV show that, Homeland, for instance, I'm sure that those are all really great boosts. So I guess that leads us to, I'll throw this to Jill maybe a little bit. When you look at different positions. We've talked about STEM or cyber or analysts or data scientists. Does recruitment change for each of those positions to a large extent, or is it basically they're all in the same box, if you will, in terms of how you recruit those types of positions?
So yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes, right? So a core set of leading practices around finding, engaging, attracting, evaluating, and onboarding the talent tends to be the core infrastructure, regardless of the position you're talking about. What's important to that candidate and how you engage them and the tools that you use can and should be different in many cases. So, for example, if you're talking to someone about a technology-based job and the process around talent acquisition is manual, right, there's a disconnect between what that person is passionate about and the culture of the organization that they're looking to join. So it definitely should be tailored based on the person that you're looking for, and that's where, again, this value proposition and branding becomes so important.
Angela, are you guys at DHS and maybe more broadly, is that something OPM maybe is also doing, focusing on that different recruiting strategies for the different types of skill sets that are needed?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and I think the days of just going to like a hiring event or hiring fair and handing out squeegee balls is, is just kind of over. And so a lot of the things that we're really trying to focus in on is exactly what Jill's talking about, is target the talent that you want and then appeal to them in such a way that the things that you have that are available. Because honestly, going in and explaining to a 22-year-old that we have this wonderful retirement program is so foreign to them, they really don't care. But if instead you could say, hey, look, we really do make use of telework, or we really do have this work-life balance, and we have child care subsidy, and we have, so it's not even just the skill set, but also talking to the age group in which you're actually recruiting from. What is it that they're interested in, and then hone in on those particular benefits that we might actually provide. That I think that is, we have to think of it holistically instead of just thinking it sometimes just by occupation, because people are people. And they have different needs, and we have to figure out how to meet them at wherever it is that they are.
And I think just to kind of pull on that string a little bit, it's also when people hear program analyst, they don't understand what that means.
Right.
It's what will you actually be doing? I think once people understand, well, actually you'll be making sure whether it's HUD, people get housing, or whether it's USDA, children get fed. I think that's the other piece that has to be expanded.
Exactly.
I think that's part of the discussion.
A lot more show and tell. I think it's just people are just more visual, and bring the toys there if we can. If they're not classified, but bring the toys there, let them experience them. And DHS, and I've told this story before, but they have this wonderful thing that they did. This is actually at Customs Border and Protection, where they actually brought an intern that they had, and they took their interns down to the border, and these were contract specialist interns, took them down to the border and let them try out and test out the actual things that they were going to buy. There's nothing greater to a 20-year-old than to say, go ahead and test out this machine gun. Go ahead and test out, this Humvee or whatever, because you're going to actually be buying it for the men and women that are going to be wearing that Kevlar vest. So I think that those are the kinds of things that are just really needed.
All right, that's a great place to take a quick break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Attracting and Retaining the 2020 Workforce, sponsored by Accenture on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.